Hello and welcome back to Peaky Boardgamer. My name is Akos and today I will teach you a game called SkyTeam. SkyTeam is a cooperative game for 2 players only, which plays in 15 minutes and in which players are trying to land an airplane. The game is designed by Luc Raymond, produced by Scorpion Mask Games, and it has very simple rules that I will explain right after the quick overview, so don't go anywhere. In this game, players are airplane commanders performing the landing procedure at airports all over the world. At the beginning of every round, players will be rolling a set of dice and then they alternate turns, placing one die on spaces of the plane's control panel. To land the plane successfully, players will have to perform various tasks. The captain is responsible to fully deploy the landing gear and also to warm up the plane's brakes for landing. On the other hand, the co-pilot must set the wings flaps in landing position. Working together and without revealing their dice, the two pilots control the leveling of the plane, the total power of the engine affecting their speed, and they will also communicate with the control tower to avoid the air traffic around the airport. At the end of every round, the plane steadily descends. When it finally touches the ground, if the players are right on the airport, the plane is fully leveled and the players have managed to brake adequately, then they have successfully landed in SkyTeam. Start by placing the control panel in the middle of the table between the two players. The player being the captain must ideally sit on the left side of the control panel next to the blue dice spaces. The player takes the blue screen and the blue set of dice. The co-pilot sits to the right of the control panel, takes the orange screen and the orange set of dice. Next, place the airplane access disc so that the arrow points to the middle arrow in the recession of the control panel. Next, use the switches markers to cover all the green lights depicted in the control panel. There are 3 switches for the gears, 4 switches for the flaps, and 3 switches for the brakes. Next, place these 3 colored markers in the indicated spaces on the control panel. Open the flight log and select one of the game's scenarios. There are easy, medium, hard and very hard scenarios. In this video, I will set up the game using this scenario. Find the approach track of the selected scenario airport, in this case it's Montreal. Some of the scenarios depict these icons which relate to additional mechanics as well as setup instructions. I will explain all of these mechanics at the end of this video. Next, find the altitude track and slide it beneath the control panel so that this screen depicts 6,000 feet, which is your initial altitude. Use the correct side of the altitude track based on the color of the selected scenario and according to this illustration on the top. Then, place a reroll token onto each space on the track which depicts this symbol. Take the selected approach track and slide it beneath the control panel so that this screen depicts an illustration of clouds. Some of the spaces on this track depict some airplane symbols. Place an airplane marker for each such symbol depicted. Create a supply with the remaining airplane markers, reroll tokens, and the 3 coffee markers. The game is now ready to start. This is the moment I need to remind you that if you haven't done already, please subscribe to this channel. It will incredibly help our channel grow. And if you hit that bell button, you will also be notified of all our future videos. The game is played over a series of 7 rounds. Each round is split to 3 phases: the strategy discussion and dice roll phase, the dice placement phase, which is the main phase of the round, and the end of round phase. The first phase starts by checking the current altitude space in case it has a reroll token, in which case you take the token and place it here. You can use the reroll tokens in that area in the second phase, but we will explain what it does later on. At this point, players can discuss about where they'll be focusing their strategy in the next round. However, you are not allowed to talk about dice rolls, so you cannot tell your co-player where to place their dice in case they roll specific values. After you're done, both players will roll all of their dice behind their screen. After they do so, the dice placement phase begins and players are not allowed to communicate anymore. In this phase, players alternate turns placing one of their dice from behind their screen onto an applicable space of the control panel, starting always with the player indicated by the current altitude space. This will continue until both players have played all of their dice, in which case the phase will end. Blue dice can only be placed on blue spaces on the control panel, while orange ones can only be played on orange spaces. The only exception are these three spaces, which can accept any die color. Some spaces can only accept a die with a specific value, as indicated by the numbers in the space. So in this space, for example, you can only place a blue die of a 3 or a 4 value. If no value is depicted, then there is no die value requirement. Very important, the axis and the engine space depict an exclamation mark, meaning that you must place a die in both of these spaces on every round. So 2 of your dice will be placed in these spaces and you have another 2 for other spaces. Now let's explain the functionality of all spaces in the control panel, starting with the axis spaces. The axis works with one space for each player. After one of the spaces is filled, nothing happens. However, after the second die is placed, you immediately adjust the axis of the plane. If the value of both dice is equal, then the axis remains exactly where it was before. If, however, one of the dice is greater than the other, the plane will turn towards the higher value die, spaces equal to the difference of the dice. If the plane ever overturns so that the arrow points at the red X of the control panel, then players immediately lose the game. Next we move to the engine spaces, which will determine how fast you're moving. Again, there are 2 spaces, one for each player. After one of the spaces is filled, again nothing happens. But after the second one is filled, you immediately evaluate your speed. You add the value of the 2 dice and check the result in this track. If the result is between the blue and the orange markers, then you move only 1 distance. If the result is higher than the orange marker, then you have moved 2 distance. Finally, if the result is less than the blue marker, then you cover 0 distance. You cover distance by sliding the approach track beneath the control panel. If you moved only 1 distance, you slide it only 1 space beneath the panel. If you have moved 2 distance, then you move it a second time. And if you have moved 0 distance, then you don't slide it at all. Important, if there are any airplane figures in your current distance space and you have to move, then you crush and you immediately lose the game. Similarly, if the target airport is in your current distance space and you must move, then unfortunately you have passed the airport and again you lose. It is now becoming obvious that these airplane figures must be removed from your approach track, and this can happen by using the radio spaces. There's only 1 space for the pilot and 2 spaces for the co-pilot. After you place a die here, you count spaces equal to the die's value, starting from the current space and moving upwards. If there is any airplane in that space, you remove it. Moving now to the landing gear spaces. After you place an applicable die on a space, you immediately shift the light marker, and as this symbol indicates, you immediately move the blue engine marker 1 space to the right as a result of your changing aerodynamics. By the end of the last round, all landing gear switches must be lit, otherwise you will lose. It is exactly the same with the 4 flap switches. The only difference is that after you place a die and switch on the light, you move the orange engine marker 1 space to the right. Moving now to the brakes handling. Again, here we have 3 switches, but this time these must be lit in order from left to right. After switching the first marker on, you immediately move the brake red marker 1 space forward. After you activate the second switch, you move the marker to the next space, and so on and so forth. You don't have to activate all of the brake switches, and doing so will only affect the final round. This is because in the final round, the total engine power must be less than the maximum acceptable speed according to this indicator. If it is more, then your brakes fail, you crash and lose the game. Finally, we have 3 concentration spaces that both players can use. After placing a die there, you place one available coffee token in an empty space in the control panel. If there is no available empty space, then placing a die here will have no effect. These coffee tokens can be used by any player before placing a die to modify the die by +1 or -1 for each token you use. So if 2 tokens were available here, the orange player could use even both of them to modify a 3 die into a 1 or 5 and place it, let's say, here. Important, you cannot modify a 6 die into a 1 or a 1 die into a 6. If there is a reroll token available, then any player can use it, and then both players may reroll any number of their available dice behind their screen, so you don't have to roll all of them. After all 8 dice have been placed, you proceed with the end of round phase and players can start talking again. In this phase, you shift the altitude track to the next space, players take back their dice, and you continue with the next round. During this phase, if the airplane depicted in the altitude track moves to the current space, then you have touched the ground. If the airport depicted in the approach track is not in your active space, then unfortunately you have not managed to reach the airport in time. Thus, you lose the game. If, however, it is, you proceed to the final round of the game and players roll their dice a last time. If at the end of the final round there is no airplane figure in the approach track, your plane is fully leveled, all the lights for the flaps and the landing gear has been lit, and your total engine power is to the left of the red brakes marker, then you have successfully landed the plane. In any other case, you lose. And these are all the rules you need to know to play your first scenario. However, as you progress to airports of higher difficulty, you'll be challenged with more features and more mechanics. I will now explain all of these additional features. In some approach tracks, you can see symbols of the black die depicted in some spaces. If at the beginning of the round you have such indications in your current space, then, for each die symbol, you roll the black die and place a plane figure in the rolled distance. In this case, I would roll it a second time and place another plane here. If the roll result falls further than the airport, then you place the plane in the airport space. Remember that these symbols apply only at the beginning of the round, so if you manage to pass them by a double movement, you avoid the negative effect. The turn symbols force you to have your plane axis in specific allowed spaces. This specific one forced you to have your axis either here or there. This is checked the moment you exit the space containing the turn symbol when you move. So if I moved now, I would crash as the plane axis is not in an allowed position. If when you move you pass through multiple such symbols, then your axis must satisfy all of them. So if that was the situation and I had to move twice, I could only avoid crashing if my axis was here. If your airport uses the kerosene module, then you place this little board in any side of the control panel, and you also place this marker in the top level, indicating that you start the game with 20 kerosene. During the second phase, any player can place one of their dice here and then lose kerosene equal to the value of the die, so now I would lose 2. If, however, at the end of the round no player has placed a die, then you lose 6 kerosene, as indicated in the kerosene die space. If at any time your kerosene level drops to the X symbol, then you immediately lose. When you use the intern module, you attach this board in the bottom part of the control panel and then you randomly distribute these tokens onto the spaces. In this game, an intern is flying with you and you must fully train them before the end of the game. During the second phase, players can place one of their dice here to use the next token by following the arrows. So if the co-pilot placed this here, they would use this token, but if the blue player placed a die here, they would use the 6. The die that will be placed in the space cannot be modified by a coffee token, and the die's value must be different than the value of the token that will be used. So in this case, any die value except than 6 would be valid. After the die is placed, the next token can be used into any applicable control panel space except than a concentration space. At the end of the game, if not all intern tokens have been removed, then players will lose. When you use the wind module, you attach the wind board here and you place the plane token in the middle so that the nose is pointing the white +3 modifier space. This modifier can affect your speed when the total engine power is evaluated. So now my total power is 3 + 3 plus another 3 from the wind, 9, and I will have to move twice. Also, at the moment you evaluate your axis and after you adjust the dial, you rotate the airplane token spaces according to your axis placement. When you're playing in real-time mode, then as soon as you roll your dice, you have only 1 minute to complete the second phase. Any dice you did not place are simply lost, but if any axis or engine space is not filled, then you lose the game. When you play with the kerosene leak module, again you will use this board, but you will place one of these tokens indicating that players cannot use one of their dice in that space. The amount of kerosene you lose on every round now depends on the dice you place on the engines. After you adjust your speed, then you deduct these dice, you then add 1 and the result is the amount of kerosene you lose. So in this case it would be 4 - 2 + 1, 3 kerosene. Of course, if the marker reaches the X space, again you lose. When you play with the ice brakes module, you use this board to cover the normal brakes. Then you place the red marker here. The difference here is that in order to move to the next level, requires 2 dice to be placed with a specific same value, and both of the dice must be played in the same round. The top space can only be used by the pilot, while the bottom one by any player. When this happens, you move the red marker 1 space forward. Important, by the end of the game, the red marker must be moved to the last level, otherwise you lose. And of course, the total engine power in the last round must also be 5 or less. With this module, you can make use of the special ability cards. All of these cards give players bonuses and special powers in order to help them with the scenario. These are self-explanatory and I will not explain them during this video. You can use a number of cards equal to the number depicted in the star symbol, so in this case, 2 cards. Players choose the cards they'll be using in the game before the game starts. And this is how you can play this very addictive game called Sky Team. If you like our videos and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. Until next time, have fun and play more board games.